Stop scrolling. This is one story every parent, teacher, and student in America needs to hear. And before it unfolds, hit subscribe because stories like this expose the truth about power, prejudice, and consequences in a way mainstream headlines never do. And if you believe accountability still matters in this country, you'll want to be here for what comes next. Because this is the story of how one careless act inside a quiet public school hallway ignited a chain of events that shook a district, a courtroom, and a life that a teacher thought she could control, never knowing the man who would ultimately judge her actions wasn't just a father but a federal judge sworn to uphold the Constitution. And it all began on a cold Monday morning when 14-year-old Amara Lewis walked into Jefferson Ridge Middle School wearing her natural hair the way her grandmother had taught her to wear it, braided neatly, beads clicking softly with each step, head held high not as a statement, not as defiance, but simply as herself, unaware that within minutes her sense of safety would be shattered by a woman who believed authority gave her ownership over children's bodies, because Miss Karen Whitfield, a veteran teacher nearing retirement, had decided long ago that order meant conformity, and conformity meant looking the way she believed proper students should look, a belief quietly sharpened by years of unchecked bias, whispered approval from colleagues who never challenged her, and a school administration more concerned with avoiding complaints than confronting injustice. So when Ms. Whitfield saw Amara's hair during homeroom, she felt that familiar irritation rise in her chest, the kind she justified as professionalism, and she called Amara to the front of the class, her voice tight, telling her the hairstyle violated dress code for being distracting, even though no such rule existed. And when Amara politely said her hair was natural and within policy, the room went silent, because children recognize danger long before adults admit it exists. And instead of backing down, Ms. Whitfield doubled down, escorting Amara into the hallway under the pretense of a conversation, where the security camera blinked silently as Ms. Whitfield reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a pair of scissors meant for classroom crafts, and made a decision that would end her career and redefine Amara's childhood. Because in a moment fueled by entitlement and the certainty that nothing would happen to her, she grabbed a braid and cut it clean off, letting it fall to the floor like a trophy, telling Amara this would teach her respect. While Amara froze, shock locking her limbs as humiliation burned through her, tears spilling not because of vanity but because hair carried history, culture, and love passed down through generations, and the sound of those scissors echoed louder than any scream, because it was the sound of a boundary being violated. And when Amara finally ran, clutching the remaining braids, sobbing into the nurse's office phone as she called her father, she didn't know that the man who answered calmly, asking her to breathe, asking where she was currently presiding over a federal sentencing hearing 200 miles away, Judge Marcus Lewis, a man known in legal circles for his measured temperament and ironclad commitment to civil rights, a man who had grown up in Mississippi dodging the same kind of quiet cruelty now inflicted on his daughter. And when he heard her words, "Daddy, my teacher cut my hair," there was a pause so long the clerk beside him thought the call had dropped, because in that silence decades of memory, law, and resolve aligned, and Judge Lewis did not raise his voice or curse. He simply said he was coming, adjourned court for a family emergency, and began a drive that would end more than a commute, because by the time he arrived at Jefferson Ridge, the administration had already begun its first mistake, minimizing the incident, calling it a misunderstanding, suggesting Amara had been non-compliant, offering a forced apology and a day of suspension for the teacher, unaware that their carefully rehearsed language would soon be dissected under federal scrutiny. And when Judge Lewis walked into the principal's office in a tailored suit still creased from the bench, introducing himself not by title but as Amara's father, the temperature in the room shifted, because authority recognizes authority, even before names are exchanged. And when he calmly asked to see the footage, the written policy, the incident reports, and the scissors, the principal's hands shook just enough to be noticed, and Ms. Whitfield, summoned indefensively, still did not apologize, insisting she had acted in the best interest of discipline, never realizing that every word she spoke was digging a deeper legal grave, because Judge Lewis did not threaten, he documented, he listened, and he left, taking his daughter home where her mother held her and braided what hair remained, telling her she was still whole, still powerful. And the next morning the story would have ended quietly if not for the second twist. A substitute teacher leaked the footage anonymously to a local reporter after seeing Amara cry in class, And within hours the video spread across social media, igniting national outrage as parents, activists, and civil rights organizations demanded justice. And suddenly Jefferson Ridge was no longer a quiet suburban school but a symbol of institutional racism, with cameras parked outside and students walking out in protest. And the district's attempt to place Ms. Whitfield on paid leave only fueled the fire, because America had seen this before. Harm followed by half measures. And then came the lawsuit, filed not in anger but with surgical precision, alleging assault, violation of civil rights, emotional distress, and failure to protect. And when people realized the plaintiff's father was a federal judge, critics tried to spin it as favoritism, until Judge Lewis recused himself publicly, refusing any involvement, making it clear this was not about who he was but about what had been done. And that restraint earned him respect even from skeptics, because the case stood on evidence alone. And as discovery unfolded, more stories emerged. Other black girls disciplined for hairstyles, other parents silenced, other teachers uncomfortable but afraid to speak. And Ms. Whitfield's past complaints resurfaced, each one previously buried by administrative convenience, transforming her from a lone villain into proof of a broken system. And the trial itself became a masterclass in accountability, as Amara testified with quiet strength, explaining what her hair meant, how it felt to have it taken without consent, how she stopped raising her hand in class afterward, how mirrors became painful and the jury listened, many of them parents, some of them educators, all of them human, while the defense struggled to justify the unjustifiable. And when the verdict came back in favor of Amara, awarding damages and mandating district-wide reform, it felt less like revenge and more like restoration. Because Ms. Whitfield lost her job and her license, the principal resigned, the district implemented mandatory bias training with real oversight, and Amara received not just compensation but a platform, speaking at schools and conferences, reminding adults that children remember everything. And the final twist came months later when Judge Lewis, speaking at a law school, told students that the hardest cases are the ones closest to home, not because of anger but because they test whether you truly believe in the principles you defend. And Amara, sitting in the audience with her hair grown back, fuller and freer than before, stood to applause that had nothing to do with her father's title and everything to do with her courage, proving that power doesn't always roar, sometimes it endures, and that in America, justice may be delayed, contested, and resisted. But when truth meets resolve, even the smallest voice can change the system. So if this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you why accountability matters, subscribe now, because this isn't just one story, it's a pattern we're exposing, and the next one might be even closer to home.